I am happy to introduce another one of my nieces. I'd be even happier if she was up here and joined me. No, that's all right. You have seen me with Tino here a few times. Tendo has snuck in late, but we get her today. And I'll let her explain how she's ended up being my niece if she wants to.
Yeah.
Story's been told. Thank you.
You're
Bless
welcome.
you.
I am very happy to be here today. Uncle Joe is my uncle. Do we look alike? I love doing that to people. Uncle Joe's mom was my grandma. Grandma Sylvia still is, my grandma. She literally raised me. The reason I'm the person I am today is because of her. When we moved to the United States, she took us in, and she literally was the grandma. When I think grandma, she's the person who I think of. In addition to my biological grandma, who was on the other side of the world, she is my grandma. So Uncle Joe is literally my uncle. So yeah, that is Uncle Joe to me. So I'm happy to be here today. For those of you who don't know which Tskarai kid I am, I am Tendo. I am number 2 in the lineup of all the children. I am based right now here in the Portland, Vancouver area. During the day, I work in ophthalmology, so I work with retina specialists, which is eyes, so all things eyes and eye doctors, which is, my degree is in science, in healthcare. I get to use it in eyes right now, which is a lot of fun. At night, I work as the youth pastor intern at the Vancouver Adventist Community Church in Vancouver, so I get to work with youth, with teenagers, getting to help them increase their fellowship, their community with each other and with God, and get to know more about Him and about each other in that way. It's a lot of fun. So today, I have a question for all of you guys. Does anybody here have friends? Okay, good. Okay, awesome. Hopefully, everybody here raised their hands. If you did not raise your hand, please, I hope you have the opportunity today to make friends with somebody who's here. If not, hi. I like making friends with people. I had the opportunity to make friends with a lot of people in my lifetime. Some people, it's really easy to make friends with. Some people, it takes a lot of time. As we get started, I'm going to talk to somebody who is my friend, hopefully is your friend too. We're going to say a prayer together. Let's bow our heads and pray. Dear God, thank you so much for this opportunity that we have to be together to worship you. Bless us as we spend a few minutes speaking about you, speaking about some of the things that I've learned about my walk with you and with all the people that you've put in my life. Bless us today. We love you. Amen. All right, so how do you make friends? Think about the people in your life that you consider friends. How did you become friends with them? Well, when I was little, how did I make friends? When you were little, how did you make friends? So, a little backstory about me. I was born in Zimbabwe, which is in southern Africa. It is a really cool country. If you've never been to Africa, please do. Go visit. It's awesome. I highly recommend. Anyway, so I was born in Zimbabwe, which is in southern Africa. It is a really cool part of the world that's been around for a very long time. Another thing about me is my family, my dad's side of the family, is of royal lineage. That means that if you go far back in history, my dad's family, so my great-great-great-great-grandfather was a king. So there were people in Zimbabwe, there were palaces, there was a kingdom, there were kings, and this guy, that many greats ago, was a king. So if it had stuck around, my dad would have been in line to the throne. Unfortunately, history happened, and I'm a princess, but that doesn't mean much as far as royalty is concerned. Yeah, so when I was little, that came in handy. I would go up to other little children, and I would say, you know what? I'm a princess. And other little kids would be like, really? You're a real princess? And I'd be like, yeah. And they'd be like, can we be friends? And I'd be like, yeah. And we would go off and play at the playground together, go off into the sunset, and it was great. That's how I would make friends. And surprisingly enough, to this day, I am still friends with some of those kids who I made friends at the playground with by telling them I was a princess. It worked. Unfortunately, today, that probably wouldn't work out as well. If I came up and said, I'm a princess, I don't know, maybe it would. Great conversational starter, right? But how do I make friends today, right? Maybe I meet them at school, maybe at work, some other shared interest, another hobby. Think of the people in your life. How do you become friends with people? What makes a good relationship? What makes it last? And what makes a relationship or a friendship come to an end? Okay, so over the next few minutes here, these are some of the questions that I want us to kind of think about, and some of the things that I want us to kind of think through as we look at some friendships, some relationships in the Bible, and kind of answer, in these cases, what happened to these friendships, what happened to these relationships. And as I was thinking about this, and as I was kind of preparing for this sermon today, I looked at what are different kinds of relationships and friendships that can happen, or categories of relationships that there are. So there are romantic relationships, right? There are parent-children relationships. There's sibling relationships, whole different can of worms. If you have siblings, you know, right? There's mentor-mentee relationships. There's other friendships that really don't fit in any of those categories that are just like, all of the above, some of the above kind of relationships. And then there's spiritual relationships, right? So let's think about some of these relationships. What would be examples in the Bible that you can think of some of these relationships? What about romantic relationships? You can just shout it out. What's an example in the Bible of a romantic relationship? Okay, classic, Ruth and Boaz. Okay, Ruth and Boaz. Joseph and Mary. Love that one, okay. Adam and Eve, thank you. That's what I think of first, is Adam and Eve. David and Bathsheba. Okay, that's an interesting one. Kind of a complex one, okay. Okay, another complicated one. Samson and Delilah. Okay, let's move on from the romance for a little bit. What about parent-child relationships? What are some parent-child relationships in the Bible? Okay, Mary and Jesus. Okay, Hannah and Samuel. That's a nice one. They're cool. I hadn't thought of that one for some reason, but yeah, there's one right there. What's another one? Okay, Noah and his family. That's a cool one. Okay, all right. You said Eve, Cain, and Abel. Okay, what about on this side? I hear a lot from Pastor Alex and his friends over here, but what about on the left side of here? Okay, Abraham and Isaac. Okay, cool. That's really cool. Okay, what about sibling relationships? This one was interesting because there's a lot of siblings that are mentioned in the Bible, but there's not a whole lot of stories about siblings. Joseph and Reuben, okay. Okay, Jacob and Esau. Cain and Abel, all right. I think there's a lot of negativity in sibling relationships. James and John, okay, all right. That's a little positivity there. Jacob and Esau, All right, there seems to be some sibling rivalry in the Bible for some reason. All right, what about mentor-mentee relationships? All right, Jesus and his disciples. I thought of Paul and Timothy was one, right? Yeah, that's a classic. There's Moses and Joshua. There's Eli and Samuel, maybe. Is another one? Yeah. David and Nathan. All right, the prophet Nathan. Okay, all right. Ooh, hadn't thought of that one in that way, but that's cool. Yeah. All right. What about spiritual relationships in the Bible? All right. Yeah. Pretty much Jesus and everybody he was friends with, right? You could look at it in that way. Yeah. Enoch walked with God. So, yeah, his relationship with God. Yeah. Moses. Yeah. What about angels and the people they interacted with? Yeah. So, like Daniel interacting with angel, or Jesus, Abraham, all these people, right? Lot. Yeah. Yeah. These are all different relationships we see in the Bible. And, okay, so I was looking at these different relationships and found some interesting things that stood out to me in these relationships. A lot of them fall into more than one category, right? You find people like where they're mentor, mentee, but also parent-child. They might be spiritual, but then they're also parent-child. They might be sibling, but then they're also in more than one category. And that happens outside of the Bible as well. Like my mom, she's my mom, parent-child, but she's also my mentor in many ways, right? And that happens in the Bible as well. All right, so today, I want us to focus on a couple of these stories that stood out to me and that have made an impact on my life. And hopefully they will stand out to you in some way as we spend a few minutes on them together. Okay, so let's go to the book of 1 Samuel together. 1 Samuel chapter 17. We're going to talk a little bit about David and Jonathan. David and Jonathan. All right, who was David? Who was Jonathan? And as we do so, I want us to answer these questions. As we look at these stories we're going to look at today, these three questions I want us to answer. How did these characters become friends? So these same questions that we answer in our lives, how did these characters become friends? What made these relationships good or bad? And did these relationships come to an end? And if so, how? All right, so starting in the book of 1 Samuel. 1 Samuel chapter 17, looking at the story of David and Jonathan. A little recap here. So David is a guy who is a shepherd, right? We hear his name come up first as the guy who is the youngest son of Jesse. He has a whole bunch of older brothers who are a lot stronger than him, who can fight, who go off to war to fight for the king, who is King Saul. We're going to pick up this story in chapter 17, verse 55. 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 55. Here's what it says. Okay, so we're picking it up at the kind of where David and Saul meet. King Saul is the king of Israel at this time, and he wants to he wants to defeat the Philistines. As Saul watched David going out to meet the Philistine, he said to Abner, commander of the army, "Abner, whose son is that young man?" Abner replied, "As surely as you live, O king, I do not know." So, this is the first time Saul sees David, all right? So, we don't really hear Jonathan's name at this point in the story, but this is the first time Saul sees David, okay? So, we're going to have to use our imagination for a second here. David, how did David end up here, right? So, going back, let's imagine a little bit how has David ended up at this point in the story. Jesse's like, okay, David, I want you to go out, and you're going to go and make sure your brothers are okay? I'm sending you out to the battlefield, and I want you to make sure that your brothers are okay. Here's a bunch of gifts. Take it to them. Make sure they're fine. David is like, sure, Dad, I got you. I'm going to go and do the thing you sent me to do. He gets there. He sees this giant Goliath. He's like, who's that guy, and what's he doing? Brothers are like, you just do what you're told. Thanks for the gifts. Go home. David's like, no can do, because who is that guy and what's he doing here? Brothers are like, listen, go home, do what you were told to do, everything's fine. David is like, I can't do that because I'm trying to figure out who is this really tall guy that you guys are all scared of. David figures out this is Goliath who is taunting the Israelites and who is taunting God. He figures all of this out. And he says, listen, I can fight this guy. The brothers are like, really? That's not going to happen. We all know the story of David and Goliath, right? Thank you. Awesome. I'm glad we all know the story and we know how it goes down. All right. So imagine for a second you're Jonathan. Jonathan is the son of King Saul. All right. King Saul is the king of Israel. Now, as the king of Israel, your job is to lead, right? So you are on the front line of everything that goes on. Jonathan, as the son of the king, is being prepared to be the next leader. That means you watch everything your father does. So everywhere your father goes, you are either there watching it happen or you hear about it right after it happens. So when we see here that Saul sees David, we know that either Jonathan was there when it happened or he heard about it shortly afterwards, because he being prepared to be the next king, he knows everything that is going on. So this is what happens in the story here. So King Saul hears about David. He figures out this guy is trying to kill the king. He's trying to kill Goliath. Going to the next verse, verse 56, the king says, "Find out whose son this young man is." He's trying to figure out who David is. As soon as David returned from killing the Philistine, this is Goliath. Goliath has now been killed. Abner took him and brought him before Saul with David, still holding the Philistine's head. King Saul has just been killed. "Whose son are you, young man?" Saul asked. David said, "I am the son of your servant Jesse." So now we know who David is. And Jonathan and David have just been introduced to each other. All right, this is the beginning of the story of David and Jonathan. So somewhere in the room, maybe standing next to his father or in a nearby corner, Prince Jonathan has just been introduced to David. He's been watching David, and he's just seen his heroic actions, and he's just seen how David has killed Goliath. Somewhere in this moment, Jonathan has felt a special sense of belonging to this shepherd kid who has just killed a giant, and he has watched how his country has changed forever. This kid soldier has just somehow changed his country forever, and Jonathan knows it. He has seen this moment happen. And somehow it doesn't scare him. It really attracts him to David. Jonathan's father is terrified of this, but Jonathan is really drawn to this. And so in that moment, the two guys become besties. Now, how do we know they become besties? They not only become friends, but Saul moves David into the palace. So the two guys literally live in the same house now because they kind of have to, because Saul moves him in. Saul is terrified of David. Well, if you move on to chapter 18, we're going to move to chapter 18. We see something interesting happen here with King Saul. So we talked about how a lot of these relationships in the Bible have fit in multiple categories. David's relationship with Jonathan is very interesting because not only is David's relationship with Jonathan something that affects the two of them, but you have to factor in Saul's dynamic with David. Because Saul is not only Jonathan's father, Saul is also David's enemy. So, 1 Samuel chapter 18, we're going verse 1. 1 Samuel chapter 18, verse 1 to 4 says, "After David had finished talking with Saul, Jonathan became one in spirit with David, and he loved him as himself. From that day, Saul kept David with him and did not let him return to his father's house. And Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as himself. Jonathan took off his robe he was wearing and gave it to David along with his tunic, even his sword, his bow, and his belt." So, going back to those three questions that we're asking ourselves, how did they become friends? How did they become friends? It was really through the experience of the killing of Goliath. And it was really because of that enmity that Saul had for David that they had the opportunity for them to become close friends. Because Saul, you know that expression, keep your friends close and your enemies closer? That's what Saul was trying to do. But he gave that David and Jonathan, by doing that, an opportunity for them to become best friends. So now David and Jonathan are brothers in the palace. David is working as a soldier for King Saul, and he's succeeding really well at all he does. And as he's doing so, the girls are fanning. The fangirls are really going at it for David, and they love him so much. He's young, he's strong, he's handsome, and they're creating all these songs, these chants, these like things that fangirls do even to this day. And Saul is really not enjoying it. Verse 7 of chapter 18 tells us all about it. It says, they danced, they sang, they said, Saul has slain his thousands, but David his 10,000s. And Saul was really not having it because they're like, Saul is cool, he's great, but David, oh my goodness, he's amazing. And Saul did not appreciate that. Like imagine, it really didn't do much to help his ego. He stared at David, he watched what he ate, he watched what he drank, he watched how he lived, and his jealousy was getting the better of him. Saul could tell that God's special blessing had taken over David's life, and it really, really bothered him. Verse 12 tells us that Saul was afraid of David because the Lord was with David and the Lord had left Saul. Saul failed to see how important this friendship with David was for Jonathan because his jealousy and his desire to win had taken over his ability to see how great this friendship was for his son, who would or was supposed to be taking over as the next king of Israel. Jonathan is watching everything that's going on between his father, who he loves, and his best friend, whom he loves. And he decides he's going to warn David, his best friend, about what he sees going on in the palace and what he sees happening with his father and how his father wants his best friend dead. Let's go over to the next chapter, chapter 19. 1 Samuel chapter 19, starting in verse 1. Saul told his son Jonathan, we all there? 1 Samuel chapter 19, verse 1. Got it? All right. Saul told his son Jonathan and all the attendants to kill David. But Jonathan was very fond of David and warned him, my father Saul is looking for a chance to kill you. Be on your guard tomorrow morning. Go into hiding and stay there. I will go out and stand with my father in the field where you are, and I will speak to him about you and will tell you what I find out. So he's like, listen, my dad really just wants to kill you. He wants to get rid of you because he sees that God is with you. He sees that God has left him, and that's really not sitting well with him. So I'm going to go talk to him. I'm going to try to reason with him. I'm really going to try to settle this, and then I'm going to let you know how that goes. Unfortunately, at this time, the situation just kept getting worse. David realized that, both David and Jonathan realized that this was not going to end well, and that if David did not leave the palace soon, things were going to really, really go south. So, David fled. David leaves the palace, and long story short, the duo promised each other that they would never, ever forget each other, and that they both sides promised that they would both do everything in their power to protect each other. If you can read the whole story of how it all went down in chapter 20 of 1 Samuel, and see how they both had this really emotional experience, and they both did everything. They promised each other that whatever goes down, whatever happens, whoever side might survive, we're going to protect each other, and we are going to do everything in our power to make sure the other side's family is taken care of. You can see verse 42 actually says, Jonathan said to David, "Go in peace, for we have sworn friendship with each other in the name of the Lord, saying, 'The Lord witness between you and me and between your descendants and my descendants forever.' And then David left, and Jonathan went back into town." It was a really tearful goodbye and experience for both of them. And as far as the Bible tells us, this was the very, very last time that David and Jonathan saw each other alive. That was it. How did the story end for them, though? Was it a positive or negative relationship ending for them? Was it positive? Was it negative? Okay, let's go to chapter 31. 1 Samuel chapter 31. 1 Samuel chapter 31. The Bible tells us what happened to Jonathan at the end of his life. 1 Samuel chapter 31. This is verse 1 and 2. Now the Philistines fought against Israel. The Israelites fled before them, and many fell slain on Mount Gilboa. The Philistines pressed hard after Saul and his sons, and they killed his son Jonathan, Abinadab, and Melchishua. And that was the end of the life of Jonathan. Kinda. Let's go to 2 Samuel. 2 Samuel chapter 9, verse 6 and 7. All right, so we're going next book in the Bible. 2 Samuel chapter 9, verse 6 and 7. Okay, so we just, I will pretend I did not hear that. Okay, 2 Samuel chapter 9, verse 6. We just read a verse talking about the end of Jonathan's life. He gets killed while fighting with his father on Mount Gilboa. Life moves on for David. David becomes king of Israel, right? Remember, Jonathan was supposed to be the next in line to be king of Israel. David ends up king of Israel. David never forgets his friend Jonathan. He never forgets the promise he had made to his friend that whatever happens, I'll take care of you and I won't forget your family. As far as David knows, all of Jonathan's family gets killed along with him during those battles, right? Years go by, and Jonathan hears wind that there is a son of Jonathan that actually survived. This son is crippled, and nobody knows where he is or what happened to him. David, is like, where is this kid and what happened to him? Long story short, they end up finding him, and David is like, go find him and bring him to me. So here we are, 2 Samuel chapter 9, verse 6, and it says, when Mephibosheth, that's the name of Jonathan's son, the son of Jonathan, the son of Saul, came to David, he bowed down to pay him honor, but David said, "Mephibosheth, your servant," he replied. "Don't be afraid," said David, "for I will surely show you the kindness for the sake of your father Jonathan. I will restore to you all the land that belonged to your grandfather Saul, and you will always eat at my table." So Jonathan, he kept the promise that he had made to, David kept the promise that he had made to Jonathan, and Mephibosheth, the son of Jonathan, was given everything that had belonged to his father, everything that had belonged to his grandfather. So, what made this relationship good and bad? And how was this relationship a good or a bad ending? I think what made this relationship good was the friendship and the love that David and Jonathan had for each other. I think what made this relationship good was the fact that regardless of the hatred and the jealousy that Saul showed, they did not let that stop them from being friends. And regardless of the hatred and jealousy of Saul, they did not let that stop them from being respectful and polite to their king. Was this a happy or a good ending for their relationship? I think it was. Was it a perfect ending? No. It ended in the death of Jonathan and the collapse of that part of the kingdom. But it also ended in David fulfilling the promise that he had made to his best friend. And I think because of that, it was a good ending. All right, I want us to look at one more story before we end today. All right, let's go look at the story that is in a different part of the Bible. Let's go to the book of Daniel. Daniel chapter 1. All right, so this is a story that is familiar to many of us. This is the story of Daniel and three friends of his, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So who were these guys? These were Israelites who were taken by a king named Nebuchadnezzar from their home and taken to Babylon. They were handpicked because they were really smart, they were really good looking, and they were really strong, and they were taken to Babylon to be taught in the schools there, and this is where we pick up their story. So we are going to the book of Daniel. Boop. And we are going to chapter 1, verse 6. Chapter 1, starting in verse 6. So here's where we pick up their story. Among these were some from Judah: Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah. The chief official gave them new names. Here are their new names. Daniel, they became Belteshazzar. Okay, Daniel, the name Belteshazzar, to Hananiah, Shadrach, to Mishael, Meshach, to Azariah, Abednego. But Daniel resolved not to defile himself with royal food and wine, and he asked the chief official for permission not to defile himself this way. Okay, Daniel finds himself. If we read the story, we hear his name more often, so we can assume he finds himself as the position of spokesperson for the group. How do we know this? Look at verse 11. It says, Daniel then says to the guard, whom the chief official had appointed over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, please test your servants for 10 days. Give us nothing but vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then compare our appearance with that of the young men who eat the royal food, and treat your servants in accordance with what you see. So he agreed to this and tested them for 10 days. So this request is being made by all of them, but the person doing most of the talking is Daniel. All right, so Daniel is kind of like the spokesperson, but he's speaking for the whole group. At the end of the 10 days, what do we find happens? We go to verse 17. It says, to these four young men, God gave knowledge and understanding of all kinds of literature and learning, and Daniel could understand visions and all kinds of dreams. At the end of the time set by the king to bring them in, and the chief official presented them to Nebuchadnezzar. The king talked to them and found none equal to Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, so they entered the king's service. So they say, we don't want to eat food like everybody else. Why? Because this food has been offered to idols. We do not believe in worshiping idols. Why? Because we believe this food is not going to help us be smart and we believe we are smart, and we want to stay that way. So, try us for 10 days, and if after this 10-day period you see that our ideas were wrong, then we're going to go back to eating like everybody else. The 10-day trial period comes to an end, and they find out they were right. Their scientific method had worked, and they were smarter than everybody else, and so they were allowed to keep with their special diet, and they were given special positions because they were smarter and better than everybody else, and they actually were, I guess they also looked better than everybody else because of it. But at the end of this, well, first question, how did they become friends? I guess it was kind of probably circumstantial, right? Did they know each other before they got shoved together into this predicament? Yeah, as far as we can tell, I don't know. Maybe they did know each other before this. Maybe they were friends in Judea before they got to Babylon. We don't know that for sure. But we do know that this experience definitely strengthened their friendship, right? Believe it or not, among me and my siblings, I am not the most talkative one. I happen to have, I know, it's really hard to believe. I happen to have the loudest voice. So when we are in any situation, I happen to be the Daniel because I get assigned as the spokesperson. Because, everybody looks to me and they're like, you do the talking. So I can relate to Daniel's position, where you walk into a situation and the rest of the friend group looks at you and, they're like, because they expect you to be the spokesperson. So I can relate with this position. But I know when you're in a situation like this, it does strengthen your friendship with the other people because you have to collaborate together and be like, what are we going to say? What are we going to do? How are we going to do it? So I know exactly how they became friends. Part of it, as far as we can tell, was the circumstance, right? It definitely. And I think the circumstance did strengthen their friendship. So what made this relationship good? I think all these things we just mentioned. The fact that they had to be strong together, they had to be smart together, they had to use their resolve to stick to the values that they had set together. So let's see how their story continues. Look at verse 20. It says, in every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king questioned them, he found them to be 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters in the whole kingdom. This is an interestingly short story, but I think that is part of what makes it really powerful. It makes it really powerful because it shows that friendship doesn't always have to be something that's long or drawn out or something that everybody sees over a long period of time. Sometimes friends are here just for now when you need them. And then after that, we don't hear much about it. What happened to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego after this experience? Aha! Yeah. Let's go to that part of the story. Let's go to chapter 3. Daniel chapter 3, starting in verse 1. Daniel chapter 3, let's read verse 1 through 6. Then we'll jump to verse 12. King Nebuchadnezzar makes this image, right? We all know the story, right? He makes this image of gold, and he invites everybody to come and worship it. And he says, if you don't worship it, you're going to be thrown into this fiery furnace. I'm going to play this music. When you hear this music, everybody bow down, all right? And if you don't bow down, you get turned into human marshmallows, toasted marshmallows, and you don't want to become that. So everybody's going to bow down. Do we hear about Daniel in this part of the story? No, there is no Daniel, there is no spokesperson. It's just Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Okay, so verse 6 says, whoever does not fall down and worship will immediately be thrown into the blazing furnace. Going down to verse 12 says, they're describing what they've seen, because the other astrologers and wise people are like, well, I've seen some people who have not bowed down, but there are some Jews whom you have set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who pay no attention to you, O king. They neither serve your gods nor worship the image of gold which you have set up. Verse 16, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they replied, O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you. Who's doing the talking this time? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, all three of them. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to save us from it, and will rescue us from your hand, O king. So, they say all together, I don't know exactly how they did it, but it says all three of them did the talking this time. They said, we will not bow down to your image, and we will not worship the image you have set up. How does the story end for them here? They were saved, yes. The Bible tells us that. Let's go down to verse 24. Then King Nebuchadnezzar leapt to his feet, and so they get thrown into the fiery furnace. King Nebuchadnezzar leapt to his feet, and he says, weren't there 3 men that we tied up and threw into the fire? And then they replied, certainly, O king. He says, look, I see 4 men walking around in the fire, unbound and unharmed, and the 4th looks like the sons of the gods. Nebuchadnezzar then approached, and he says, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out, come here. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego come out of the fire, and the satraps, the prefects, the governors, the royal advisors crowded around them, and they saw that the fire had not harmed their bodies, nor was a hair of their heads singed, their robes were not scorched, and there was no smell of fire on them. Then Nebuchadnezzar said, praise be to God, the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and has rescued his servants. So their friendship turned from them needing Daniel to them being able to stand on their own. It's a very interesting turn of dynamics, right? So going back to our questions that we asked, was this friendship good? Do we think this was? Yeah, I don't think there's any question in anybody's mind, right? Do you think this friendship ended well? I don't think there's any question. I honestly, in my mind, I'm like, if you got Jesus with you in the fire, I don't think there's a better ending to a friendship than that, honestly. Do we know what happened to them after this? That's literally where it ends as far as the Bible goes, right? They step out of this fiery furnace and disappear into biblical oblivion, you know? We'll have to get to heaven to figure out what happened to them after that. But I think that's the best ending because it ends with them walking out of a fire with Jesus. Right? And as I thought about that, I was like, goes back to the verse we read, that was our scripture for today. Ecclesiastes 4:10. I want us to read that as we wrap up today. Ecclesiastes 4:9 and 10. Let's read it together as we close off. Ecclesiastes. Whoop. There it is. Right after Proverbs. Ecclesiastes 4:9 and 10. Here's what it says. 2 are better than 1 because they have a good return for their work. If one falls down, his friend can help him up. Relationships are really interesting and really different and really complicated, right? Some are pretty straightforward, like Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego. They were fairly short-term relationships as far as the Bible goes. We have like 2 chapters, and then that's all we hear about it. Some are very complicated, like David and Jonathan, because you got Saul in the mix, and you have one trying to kill another, and all this going on. And ending that is kind of incomplete, where you're like, it's sad, but it's happy, but we wish it didn't end that way, but there's so much good that came out of it. But there's so much we can learn from it, you know? And every time I look at that, I'm like, every relationship I encounter reminds me that there's good that can come out of this, right? Is the ending always what we want? No. But I can learn from this. And what I can learn from it, I can take and I can use in the next thing. And what we can learn from each relationship we see in the Bible is God's always there. He's with each one, God is always there, and he never leaves us alone. He's not going to forsake us, and he's not going to leave us to do it all by ourselves. And sometimes we get an ending that's as cool as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, where Jesus is literally standing there in the fire with us. Sometimes we don't see him, but that doesn't mean he's not there. And I want us to remember that. And like this verse reminds us, we need each other, right? So my encouragement for you, and this is something I remind myself all the time, as somebody who is not as extroverted as some people are, power to the extroverts. Extroverts are so cool. But as somebody who's not as extroverted as some people are, I have to remind myself this too. We actually do need each other, right? Just make sure you surround yourself with people who can encourage you and be an encouragement to other people as well, right? So let's close off with prayer together, and just remember that. Be an encouragement to someone else today, and look out for the people who are there to be an encouragement to you too. Let's pray together. Dear God, thank you so much for all the different complicated relationships that we have in life and that we can learn from. Thank you for the different relationships that we see in the Bible as well, and that they're not always positive, but there's so much that we can learn from, and that we know that whatever happens, you are always there with us. Bless us as we go throughout this day, throughout this week, and give us the guidance throughout our lives. We love you. Amen.